Welcome to another day in the wood shop. Today is Saturday. So we're about a week into this business of trying to not go anywhere and staying away from people. Of course, I did go to the city this week, so I had to be quite careful. But since then, I believe it was yesterday, the province has declared state of emergency, which means they can by law regulate what people and businesses do, and they have legislated that we are to not get closer than 6 feet to another person or stranger if you're in a public place. They regulate how many people can be in a store. The stores have people at the doors counting to only allow so many people in the store. So things are getting tighter. And I'm not thinking that that's a bad thing. I don't think that'll last very long. I'm hoping. Because this curve needs to be flattened. And this is a very effective way to do it. So we're fine here. We just went for a little walk, get some exercise, and then we'll spend the rest of the day in the wood shop. My wife's in the house. She's doing some books and whatnot. So I'm still working on these little mating nucs. I'm getting down to it. I believe I'm going to paint these. I initially thought I would dip them, but I'd like color variety. And they don't sit out for nearly as long as probably even honey supers do. In my operation, they likely won't sit out longer than, say, 6 weeks in a season. So I think painting will be more than sufficient. I'll have to maybe get a couple more colors. I haven't inventoried what colors I have, but I don't think I have very many. I'd like to get some nice bright colors to paint. I'll just paint each side of the box a particular color, just for navigational purposes for returning queens after their mating flights. Today I'm hoping to do two things. I want to add some cleats to the bottom of these mating nucs to help in the stability when they're sitting on the ground or pallets or other boxes or whatever they're sitting on. And also I want to cut and install small shims on my small covers that I've made for them. Here's the cover I've made for each one. It's just a small cover that will cover a quarter of the box. I've drilled a 2-inch hole. These are small enough, fortunately, I could drill them on my drill press, which was far easier than the handheld drill. And my feeder plug will go in there very nicely. Doesn't really stick through much, and I plan to put a small shim. I've done the math on B space, and I think about a 1/4 inch shim will be about right along here. So all I plan to do is take some 3/4 stock and rip it into strips. So my shim will be 3/4 wide and a 1/4 inch thick. And that should serve well. I'd like to have a shim on there for different reasons. First of all, it's only 1/2 inch material. So that feeder plug does stick through a little bit, so you can see that. And also a little strip of wood, even a 1/4 inch, just helps that plywood stay a little more flat. You know, I've got 1/2 inch here, add 1/4 inch, and I've got 3/4 inch there, so that'll help stabilize that plywood. This one I had to cut the wrong way, if you want to call it that, the less than desirable way. I was trying to use up a few scraps of plywood here, so some of them weren't wide enough to cut it the desirable way. And you may or may not have seen my video on that, but to quickly recap, you can see the grain direction difference on these two. This grain direction goes the short way, this grain direction goes the long way. Where that makes a difference is when it gets wet. It gets wet on the top and or the bottom. So the colony can make it wet with humidity. The top, of course, if it gets rained on. as wood gets wet and dries, wood expands and contracts. With the grain this way, the movement is imperceptible. That's not a direction that we ever care about. This way, however, that's where the movement happens. And thickness wise, that is not a big deal in this case either. So where that's important is, if this top layer gets wet, it'll expand, and that'll tend to bow the lid down. As it dries, then that'll pull the lid back up. So this lid will tend to move in this direction, and this direction. And being that that's the short way, the overall bow is minimized. Being that this one is the other way, then it's the long direction, so the bow will be more emphasized on this side. It's not that big a difference, this side to this side. It's more just a principle to go by. You can see on this bottom, I've tried to use the same principle. My grain direction is this way. There are a couple I cut to use up the last bit of material, not have to get into another sheet. They're actually cut the other way. Probably won't be an issue because these are screwed on. It's a good woodworking principle to use. So what I'm doing here with the boxes, this is the mating nuke that I put a bottom on yesterday. I'm going to cut some cleats for the bottoms. So I'm going to put these cleats on here. This is not the cleat, this is an example material. This is too short. So I'm going to put this on here and step it back a little bit, just so that it's not sitting on a flat. When you have something set on a flat surface like this, any little stone or imperfection in what you're placing this on is going to make it wobble or not sit properly. If you minimize the contact surface, you have a greater likelihood of it sitting stable. And just as just a matter of course, I don't know that I'll set these on another colony. However, I brought in one of my covers that I built, which theoretically go over this box. See, it's a standard box, standard Langstroth 10 frame box, I should say. So I want to put my cleat somewhere in here. I just brought this for kind of double checking my work. Kind of in here, leaving a bit of slop, so I'll probably leave about a 1/4 inch of leeway there, and then screw these cleats down right about there. Cleat might be a bit wider than that, because I have a 1x6 that I'm going to use for this, and I think I'll just cut the 1x6 in two, which should give me two reasonably wide spacers. They have to be wide enough so they don't just crack and end up falling apart in the near future. That's what I'm doing today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and stay well. Chin up. We're all in this together separately. We can sit and watch YouTube and work in the wood shop if that's an option for you. So, all the best. Enjoy the video. I've had some comments about table saw safety on my videos. Table saw safety is very important. And I'm not perfect. I sometimes do things that I maybe shouldn't do. I try not to, though. It's very important to stay safe, particularly these days. You can't replace safety with safety equipment. Safety equipment is very important. You go beekeeping, you have your smoker, you have, your veil, etc. Many of us use gloves. You might wear an entire suit. It's all safety equipment. I use my oxalic acid vaporizer. I use gloves. I use a respirator. I use a face mask. It's all safety equipment. So safety equipment is important. One of the pieces of safety equipment here is the fact that this is a saw stop table saw. In normal mode, and I say in normal mode because there's a way to defeat it, this saw will not cut your fingers off. I say that, but you know, who's going to say, oh, this saw won't cut my fingers off, and just go and shove your fingers in the blade? Don't do that. It's just not smart. However, it has a safety brake on it that if you touch that blade while it's moving, that safety brake will stop the blade. I in fact have an example here. This safety brake recently triggered when I ran into a nail with the table saw. So this brake sits in the table saw like this. The blade spins past it. When it detects contact, the brake triggers and goes into the blade hits it and it stops. It deforms the brake. It's a disposable. You can't reuse these. Okay? It's over $100 for that. Here's another example. I've blown this brake 3 times. I've never touched it with my fingers once. This one, I believe, was another nail. It might have been a bit of glue or glue line, but I think it was a nail. This is a very old, yucky blade that I was using for questionable material. So this is what it looks like when that brake kicks and that blade ends up buried in it. It's not very easy to get that apart, so I often don't take it out. I often don't take it out because this often happens. Anyway, so that's what happens. Not only does that stop the blade, but the inertia of the blade drops the blade beneath the table. So when that happens, the blade disappears. But that was not what I was meaning to talk about. Somebody recently commented, oh, don't get your fingers so close to the blade, and you're right, you should not. This throat insert is a good guide as to how close you should be getting your fingers to the blade, or you should not be getting your fingers to the blade. It's red, and if you see red, you shouldn't be passing your fingers over top of the red part. Use push sticks. Has a nice little heel on it to push your material, keeps your hand up away from the blade. There's a bit of a tacky surface to it. This is one of my favorites because, as you can see, I've sawed right through it. It'll do very thin material. I can do down about 1/4 of an inch with that one. So that's nice. This one is nice for doing dado cuts, non-through cuts. With the dado blade, it has quite a tacky surface. Allows you good contact and nice handle to keep good pressure on it. It has these retractable feet on it, so you can drop that little foot as a heel to grab the edge of your material, or snap it up in place to place it in the center of a board. Or if you're just placing it in the center, you can just push it down and it comes right up. So that's a really nice little one. That's a micro jig. They make something called the gripper too. It's a much more complicated unit. I don't feel that I need a gripper. They're very expensive. So anyway, that's one of the good units to use. Milescraft's push stick, that's a good one. This is a Craig deal. Another safety thing is a feather board. They're nice because they not only keep your work pushed against the rip fence, but they also give you some kickback. Once you get a material in there, it doesn't move back very easily because those fingers grab it. It just screws down into the miter track. So I could use that in this situation. Push that against my material. Just give it a little bit of push. You don't need a whole lot of pressure on it. Tighten those real nice. And now that's going to help me make my rip cuts, keep my material to the fence. These aren't highly accurate. They don't have to be precise. So as far as there ever being a gap or me not doing it right, I'm not worried about that. It's not what I need, but it gives me the kickback protection, so that's nice. This has a nice riving knife on it. That helps avoid kickback because your material doesn't come around the back of the saw and then get into the blade and then fling forward back against you. So I mentioned that you still have to treat this machine as with respect. I ran that in bypass mode because this lumber is wet. It was sitting outside in the snowbank and it's a bit wet. And with wet lumber, the safety brake can misinterpret that as a finger contact. That's usually how these brakes are triggered. It just so happens that this scrap lumber I have is treated, which will be very nice for this. You know, it's outside the hive. You shouldn't put treated lumber in the hive, but it'll be outside the hive. It might be sitting on the ground, so that'll protect that cleat. So I'm going to go about 1.5 inches back, and that's 2 11/16 for each one of these. So that's plenty big. It'll be fine. It'll hold that plywood nice and flat over time because there's no screws in the middle here. No screws in the face, just the edge. So put that board on there, screw it to the edge of the box, and that'll make that strong. As with everything I build, I want it to last. This is not fine furniture, so I'm using a bit of a 2x4 for a spacer. So that cleat will go right about there. But the reason I marked it is I want to glue that. I know I use a lot of glue, but it's important to me that this stay secure to that bottom and have some kind of mechanical adhesion and some kind of chemical adhesion, glue. And I want something thick because this is a rough surface. This is kind of a nasty surface too. It's actually wet. And I'm going to use Peel Premium on this. A bit expensive, but it's a fantastic product. fixing to cut some very thin pieces here, 1/4 inch wide to be exact. Some of them not very long either. I've replaced my stock insert with one I made out of a vinyl plank. It's called a zero clearance insert. That means there's no gap between the insert and the blade. And specifically I want no gap back here. This one I made a mistake. I cut the grab hole in the back. I should have cut it in the front. I made 2 of them, and the other one I did right, but this one. The problem here with the stock insert is because I'm cutting a thin strip, the strip will come along and the cutoff will fall down the hole here. So that I don't want. And therefore made this zero clearance insert. That'll cut that piece just fine. Here's how those little lids work. I've made a 1/4 inch thick shim on the bottom here. That'll help stabilize the plywood and give appropriate V-space over the top bars. My wife is assembling these in the background. She's doing the stapler thing. So we have a feed hole in case the little nuke needs to be fed, and feed hole plug. That doesn't stick through very far, and it should work just fine. On here I can put a sheet of Reflectex. I have some Reflectex cut for standard size hives, so that's what this is. We can lay that over the top for some insulation value. And perhaps one of my standard migratory covers to hold everything in place. So other than painting them and putting the entrance discs on, these are done. Oh yeah, and the 100 more mini frames I need to build.